northern lands of Europa were bitterly cold, shrouded in permanent frost and guarded by warriors as fierce as the winter itself. Here lay the realm of Nordyc, one of the last and most resilient techno-barbarian states on Terra. Ruled by the enigmatic priest-king of Maulland Sen, Nordyc was more than a loose alliance of tribes. It was a hardened confederation bound by genetic alteration, ancient rituals, and unshakable loyalty to the priest-king. For centuries, Nordyc had stood unchallenged, its warriors defending their frozen lands from outsiders with unwavering ferocity. The Emperor of Mankind prepared his forces to face this formidable foe. The priest-king's followers were no mere band of savages. They were enhanced soldiers, their bodies twisted by genetic modifications that gave them strength, resilience, and endurance beyond normal human limits. Among them were witch-marked zealots, strange mystics who had sworn themselves to the dark powers that lingered in the cold, unforgiving lands. The people of Nordyc saw their priest-king as a divine figure, a prophet who communed with forces beyond mortal understanding. At the edges of Nordic's frozen borders, the Emperor gathered his forces. His army included a contingent of thunder warriors, massive, gene-forged soldiers of immense strength and fury designed specifically for the brutal task of unifying Terra. Alongside them stood 30 Custodians, the Emperor's personal guard, clad in shining augment armor and bearing guardian spears that crackled with power. The Emperor himself would lead the campaign, recognizing that Nordyc required the full measure of his presence and authority. The air was cold and still as the Emperor addressed his warriors. His voice was steady, his gaze as piercing as the winds that swept across the icy plains. "The priest-king believes his land is untouchable," he said, his tone measured yet filled with resolve. "He has made himself a god in the eyes of his people, but that belief will not save him. We march north, and we do not stop until the land of Nordyc is brought into compliance." The Thunder Warriors, each a mountain of muscle and augmented flesh, stood in disciplined silence, their eyes reflecting the Emperor's unbreakable will. The Custodians, golden and imposing, watched with calm determination. They understood the significance of this campaign. Nordyc was one of the last great strongholds of Terra's fractured past, and its fall would mark a turning point in the Emperor's quest to bring unity to humanity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a pale light over the frozen landscape, the Emperor gave the order to advance. Wrapped in the biting cold, his army began its march into the heart of the Nordic lands, their footsteps echoing across the ice like the first rumblings of an oncoming storm. The march into Nordyc was brutal and relentless. The Emperor's forces advanced through icy winds and snowstorms that bit into exposed flesh and seeped through the seams of their armor. The land itself seemed to reject them, a barren expanse of jagged mountains, endless plains of snow, and twisted remnants of ancient infrastructure. Rusted towers, half buried in ice, loomed on the horizon like the bones of a forgotten civilization, remnants of a golden age long since fallen into decay. Broken roads stretched out in fractured lines, disappearing into the blizzard, and derelict machines lay scattered across the wasteland, silent witnesses to a time when Terra had known a different kind of power. As they pressed deeper, signs of Nordic resistance began to emerge. Scouts reported fortified positions nestled among the ruins, each defended by soldiers of the priest-king, hulking warriors clad in mismatched armor, stitched together from salvaged metal plates and animal hides. The defenders had decorated the ruins with crude symbols carved into the walls of broken structures, ancient sigils and runes painted in blood and ash. These markings were more than mere warnings. They were signs of the dark, esoteric rituals that bound the people of Nordyc to their priest-king in absolute loyalty. The Emperor ordered a halt as they approached the first of these fortifications. It was a crumbling tower, a relic from Terra's past, now repurposed as a Nordic stronghold. Trenches had been dug into the frozen ground around it, filled with warriors armed with a mix of primitive weapons and scavenged relics from the dark age of technology. Their faces were marked with war paint, their expressions fierce with the zeal of those who believed themselves chosen to defend sacred ground. The Emperor's gaze was impassive as he observed the enemy's preparations. With a single, deliberate motion, he signaled the Thunder Warriors to advance. These massive warriors, genetically enhanced and bred for conquest, moved forward like an unstoppable wave. The defenders shouted war cries that echoed across the desolate landscape, but the Emperor's forces were relentless. Heavy bolters roared to life, sending bursts of explosive fire into the trenches, and power swords crackled as they tore through armor and flesh alike. From atop the hill, the Emperor watched as his Thunder Warriors dismantled the fortification. Though the Nordic soldiers fought with desperate ferocity, their crude weapons and scavenged armor were no match for the precision and power of the Emperor's legion. The clash was brief but bloody, and soon the crumbling tower lay in ruins, its defenders scattered across the snow. As the last echoes of battle faded, the Emperor turned to one of his custodians, who approached silently, his guardian spear held at the ready. The Emperor gestured toward the wreckage. "This is only the beginning," he said, his tone as cold as the wind that swept across the plains. "The priest king has much to answer for, and we will find him." The custodian nodded, understanding the weight of the task that lay ahead. This was but the first of many battles. The Nordic heartlands awaited, filled with soldiers who would fight to the death for their leader. Each ruin, each stronghold would have to be conquered one by one if they were to bring Nordic into compliance. Without further delay, the Emperor led his army onward, leaving the smoking ruin behind them. They moved deeper into the wastes, toward the heart of the Priest King's domain, where the true battle awaited. The Emperor's forces pressed on through the frozen wastelands, marching ever deeper into Nordic territory. The landscape was bleak, filled with shattered remnants of ancient machines and twisted metal structures half buried in snow, the silent relics of a bygone age. The ruins stood like broken monuments to humanity's lost grandeur, a reminder of the world that had once been and the world the Emperor sought to restore. As they advanced, resistance grew fiercer. Nordic warriors lay in ambush among the wreckage, emerging suddenly from behind rusted machinery or from hidden tunnels carved into the ice. These warriors were unlike any the Thunder Warriors had faced before, hulking, genetically modified men whose eyes gleamed with fanatical devotion. Their bodies bore signs of crude augmentation, their muscles grotesquely enhanced, and their skin marked with ritualistic scars. Some wielded primitive weapons made from salvaged metal, while others carried scavenged energy weapons, likely salvaged from the ruins that littered their homeland. The Emperor signaled his forces to split into smaller contingents, each led by a Thunder Warrior captain, to root out and destroy the Nordic ambushes scattered across the terrain. The Custodians remained close to the Emperor, a ring of golden-clad protectors whose presence alone struck fear into the hearts of those they encountered. Thane, one of the Emperor's most trusted Thunder Warriors, led a squad of his brothers through the jagged remains of an ancient highway, a road that had once connected Terra's distant cities in the Golden Age. He moved with ruthless efficiency, dispatching Nordic warriors who lunged at them from the shadows. The Nordic soldiers fought with fanatical zeal, their war cries echoing through the ruins. But for all their fury, they were no match for the gene-forged might of the Thunder Warriors. At one point, Thane's squad stumbled upon a disturbing sight, a group of Nordic zealots, painted in strange symbols, kneeling in a circle around an altar crafted from the bones of their fallen enemies. As Thane and his squad approached, the zealots did not flee or fight. Instead, they continued chanting, their voices rising in a fevered pitch as if invoking some dark force. Thane, scowling in disgust, gave a quick gesture to his men, and within moments, the zealots were silenced, their ritual brought to a brutal end. Word of these strange rituals and the fanatical resistance reached the Emperor. He knew that the closer they drew to the heart of Nordic territory, the more deeply entrenched the Priest King's influence would be. Nordic was not just a land of warriors. It was a cult, a twisted society bound by ancient oaths and dark rites. And each step deeper into this frozen wasteland meant facing a people who saw death in battle as the highest honor. The Emperor himself led the vanguard as they approached the next stronghold, an ancient complex built into the side of a mountain, its once sleek architecture now twisted and reinforced with scavenged metal and ice-encrusted barricades. This fortress, known to the Nordic people as Gjalhul, was one of the main bastions of the Priest King's Confederacy. Here, the most loyal and fanatical of his warriors awaited, prepared to give their lives in defense of their ruler. The Emperor raised his hand, and his forces halted. He surveyed the fortress, his expression unreadable, calculating. This battle would not be won by brute strength alone. The fortress was heavily fortified, and its defenders were prepared to fight to the last. After a moment, he spoke, his voice quiet but filled with a weight that carried across the ranks. "Prepare the Thunder Legion. This will be a swift assault. No mercy, no delay. We will break them here, and the path to the Priest King will be clear." The Thunder Warriors readied their weapons, their faces set in grim determination. This was the kind of battle they were made for. Direct, brutal, and unyielding. And as the Emperor's forces surged forward, the icy winds carrying their battle cries, they knew that victory lay within their grasp. As the Emperor's main force advanced on the fortress, Thane and his squad moved in the shadows, following a separate but crucial objective. They had been tasked with cutting off the Priest King's escape route, a contingency planned by the Emperor himself. The Priest King was known to be cunning, and if he saw the battle turning against him, it was likely he would attempt to flee into the vast network of subterranean tunnels that lay beneath Nordic's mountains. These ancient passageways, remnants of Terra's lost golden age, wound through the crust of the planet, stretching for hundreds of miles. A perfect escape route, unless blocked. Thane's squad moved through the ruins at the edge of the battlefield, slipping past Nordic patrols as they made their way to a hidden tunnel entrance marked on their devices. Thane held a small device, a tracker from the dark age of technology, an ancient relic from humanity's peak, which the Emperor had personally entrusted to him. It displayed a faint, flickering map of the labyrinthine tunnels, helping them navigate toward the point where these passages ran directly beneath the Priest King's seat of power. As they approached the entrance, half buried in snow and rubble, Thane gestured for his squad to halt. The ancient metal door leading to the tunnels was barely recognizable, overgrown with rust and ice, a relic of a lost era. Thane motioned to his men, and two of them moved forward to clear the entrance, their weapons at the ready. Once inside, they were greeted by darkness and the stale, cold air of the subterranean depths. The walls were lined with remnants of ancient wiring and corroded conduits, hints of the once magnificent civilization that had built this place. The only light came from the dim glow of their helmets and the ancient tracker in Thane's hand. The map flickered, showing a tangled web of tunnels, shafts, and dead ends, all stretching out below the Nordic fortress. "Stay close and watch for ambushes," Thane murmured, his voice low but firm. He knew that even though the tunnels had been abandoned for millennia, they might not be empty. If the Priest King had hidden forces down here, or if the Nordic warriors were aware of these routes, they would be ready to defend their lord's escape path. As they began the long, winding journey through the tunnels, Thane's thoughts turned to the Emperor's strategic brilliance. While the main assault raged above, his squad would be waiting in the depths, closing off any chance of escape for the Priest King. Every part of the Emperor's plan was precise, every force placed with a purpose. Thane felt a fierce pride in being chosen for this task, his squad's role woven into the larger vision. With each step, they descended deeper into Terra's crust, moving ever closer to the heart of the Nordic stronghold. It would take time to navigate this maze, but Thane was patient. They had been given a mission, and they would be ready when the moment came to intercept the Priest King, trapping him with nowhere left to run. Above, the Emperor's main force had begun its assault on one of the key Nordic fortresses with relentless intensity. The Thunder Warriors surged forward, smashing through barricades and breaching the outer defenses with brutal efficiency. The Nordic warriors met them head-on, wielding crude but powerful weapons forged from salvaged metal and ancient technologies. They fought with wild ferocity, each one willing to die in defense of the Priest King. But even their fierce loyalty could not hold against the sheer might of the Emperor's army. The Emperor himself advanced at the front of the vanguard, his golden armor shining like a beacon amid the darkened battlefield. Each movement was precise, almost effortless, as he cut down any foe who dared approach. His Custodians, positioned close behind him, cleared a path in his wake and ensured that no threat could reach him from the flanks or rear. Together, they drove forward as a spearhead into the fortress, their presence like a storm sweeping through Nordic's defenses. This fortress was one of several strongholds guarding the approach to the Priest King's true seat of power. and it had been reinforced by generations of Nordic warlords who had ruled the land before. Now, it shook under the weight of the Emperor's assault. Bolter fire tore through its defenses, and the booming detonations of breaching charges echoed across the frozen landscape as the Thunder Warriors pushed further inside. The Emperor's mind, however, was already calculating beyond the walls and barricades, his thoughts focused on the true objective, the Priest King himself. He understood that this campaign was not only about breaking individual fortresses or scattering defenders. The eventual fall of the Priest King would send a powerful message, a crushing blow to the spirit of Nordic resistance. Every stage of the Emperor's plan was meticulously crafted to lead them closer to that final confrontation. As the Thunder Warriors advanced, the Nordic defenders began to falter. The relentless assault left them with nowhere to retreat, no safe haven to regroup. Nordic soldiers chanted the name of their Priest King, invoking his protection against the fear growing in their hearts. But their chants faded, one by one, as they realized the strength of their leader's promises was no match for the Emperor's relentless will. The Emperor paused briefly, surveying the battle from within the fortress walls, watching his warriors as they cut down the last remnants of resistance in the outer chambers. With a subtle nod to the Custodians at his side, he signaled them forward. The Custodians moved with practiced efficiency, securing each corridor and clearing the path ahead, their golden armor unmarred by the chaos around them. The Emperor walked among the fallen with an unshakable calm, each step bringing him closer to the Nordic heartlands. This stronghold was a crucial link in the Priest King's defenses, one of the last bastions standing between the Emperor and the ruler's true seat of power. Its fall would send tremors through the Nordic ranks, weakening the Priest King's hold over his people. The Emperor's objective was not merely to capture strongholds, but to dismantle the very structure of belief that bound the Nordic people to their leader. He continued forward, his presence filling the narrow halls of the fortress, his expression unreadable. He knew Thane's squad was making their way through the tunnels below, positioned to intercept any attempt at escape. There would be no retreat, no sanctuary for the Priest King when the final assault came. The assault on the fortress had been swift and brutal, but as the Thunder Warriors advanced deeper into its halls, they encountered a sudden resistance, different from the desperate fanaticism they'd faced up until now. A small band of Nordic warriors, no more than a dozen, blocked the passage forward, and these men fought with a precision and skill that none of the Emperor's forces had anticipated. They were disciplined, coordinated, their strikes powerful yet calculated. Unlike the rest of the Nordic defenders who hurled themselves into battle with blind zeal, these men seemed to be true warriors in spirit, each movement betraying a deep understanding of combat. Thunder Warriors fell as the Nordic warriors exploited gaps in their armor, anticipating their moves with uncanny speed and agility. Bolters roared and power swords clashed, yet the resistance held, buying precious moments as they cut down several of the Emperor's best. Slowly, the Thunder Warriors began to overpower them, the relentless gene-forged strength proving too much even for these skilled defenders, but it was not without cost. When the dust settled, only one man remained standing, a towering figure with golden hair and fierce, bright eyes that seemed to burn with a pride undiminished by the sight of his fallen brothers. The Emperor arrived on the scene, his gaze sweeping over the bodies of his fallen Thunder Warriors, and then fixing on the lone survivor of the Nordic warriors. The man's armor was battered and dented, blood streaking down his arms and face, but he stood tall, his eyes meeting the Emperor's without a trace of fear. The Emperor's Custodians, ever alert, flanked their master, watching the Nordic warrior with a mixture of caution and respect. One of the Custodians stepped forward, his voice calm and measured. "My lord," he said, inclining his head slightly toward the Emperor, "may I grant him a warrior's death?" The Emperor regarded the scene for a moment, his expression unreadable, yet the respect he held for true warriors was known to all who served him. He gave a single, slow nod. The Custodian turned to the Thunder Warriors and raised a hand, commanding them to halt. The soldiers, bloodied and breathing heavily, obeyed without question, stepping back to form a circle around the lone Nordic warrior. The Custodian began to unfasten the golden plates of his armor, piece by piece, laying them aside until he stood clad only in the brown linen beneath. He entered the circle unarmed, his powerful frame radiating a calm intensity. Another custodian, understanding the ritual, picked up a crude, iron-forged sword from one of the fallen Nordic soldiers and tossed it to him. The custodian caught the weapon with a steady hand, feeling its weight, then fixed his gaze on the Nordic warrior. The duel began in silence. The Nordic warrior lunged forward, his strikes fierce and unrestrained, but the custodian moved with fluid grace, sidestepping each blow, reading every movement as though it were a passage from a familiar text. The custodian was not merely a soldier, he was an artist of battle, each motion precise and deliberate, his movements guided by years of training and an almost reverent respect for the craft of war. He parried each attack with ease, his expression serene, eyes never leaving his opponent. For a time, he allowed the Nordic warrior to press the attack, respecting the man's spirit and skill. But as the duel wore on, it became clear that the custodian was merely toying with him, testing the limits of the warrior's abilities. The Thunder Warriors watched in awe, silent as the two men clashed in a deadly dance, their breath misting in the cold air. Finally, in a swift, decisive movement, the custodian sidestepped a wild strike and delivered a single powerful blow that sent the Nordic warrior staggering back. The warrior dropped to his knees, his strength finally failing. Yet even in defeat, he remained upright, his gaze fierce as he looked into the custodian's eyes, unbroken in spirit. The custodian nodded, a silent mark of respect before stepping back. The Nordic warrior's spirit was finally at rest, his body slumping forward as the circle of Thunder Warriors looked on in silence. The Emperor stepped forward, observing the fallen man with an appraising eye. "Preserve his body," the Emperor commanded, his tone as calm as ever. "He will be added to the gene stocks." The Thunder Warriors moved to carry out the order, understanding the significance of the Emperor's words. This warrior, though an enemy, had proven himself worthy in the Emperor's eyes, a man whose spirit and strength would now contribute to the Emperor's grand vision for humanity. With the fortress secured and the last of the Nordic warriors defeated, the Emperor ordered his forces to press deeper into enemy territory. Every battle won and every fortress captured brought them closer to their ultimate objective, the Priest King himself. According to reports from his scouts, the Priest King's seat of power lay far to the north, nestled within a mountainous region, fortified by ancient defenses and surrounded by some of the harshest terrain on Terra. The Emperor moved through the ruins with his custodians flanking him, their silent presence a testament to his authority. Behind them, the Thunder Warriors gathered in disciplined ranks, bloodied but unbowed. They were weary, yet the intensity in their eyes remained undiminished. Each warrior felt the force of the Emperor's will driving them onward, and with each step northward, their sense of purpose only grew stronger. After overseeing the final preparations, the Emperor addressed his assembled forces. His words were few, as always, yet they resonated like the deep toll of a bell. "Ahead lies the Priest King's sanctuary," he said, his voice cutting through the frigid air. "A relic of a broken age clinging to the old ways. We will bring it down. When we are done, there will be no shadows left in this land." The Thunder Warriors responded with a roar, a battle cry that echoed through the ruins and seemed to shake the very ground. The custodians, ever disciplined, inclined their heads, their weapons ready, understanding the magnitude of the task before them. They were not merely taking down another fortress, they were breaking the will of one of Terra's last great warlords, and with him, the hold that old powers had over this land. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they advanced like an unstoppable tide, driven by the Emperor's vision, a world unified under one banner, where the warlords of old would be nothing more than dust in history's forgotten pages. The march continued through the biting cold, each step taking them closer to the heart of Nordic territory, toward the throne of the Priest King, and the final confrontation that awaited. The Emperor's forces pressed northward, a river of gold and steel winding through the snowy wastelands. With each step, the terrain grew harsher, the icy winds biting through armor and clawing at exposed skin. Yet, the Emperor's presence was a flame against the cold, inspiring his army to press forward, unyielding. As they entered the mountains, the landscape became a maze of jagged peaks and treacherous passes dotted with ancient ruins, half-buried spires and broken arches from a lost age. Somewhere within these peaks lay the Priest King's sanctuary, hidden deep in a fortress carved into the mountain itself. Scouts moved ahead, marking paths through the snow and reporting back on the resistance that grew thicker with each mile. Small bands of Nordic warriors launched ambushes from hidden vantage points, fierce but fleeting attacks meant to slow their advance. The Nordic fighters melted back into the shadows after each clash, only for another group to strike from a different direction. Finally, they reached the outer walls of the Priest King's citadel, a towering fortress embedded in the mountainside. It loomed above them, carved from raw stone and reinforced with ancient steel, lit by fires along the battlements. Nordic defenders stood ready, armed and armored, each one bearing the weight of absolute loyalty to their ruler. The Emperor halted his forces at the base of the citadel, his gaze sharp as he studied the fortress. With a signal, he ordered the assault to begin. The Thunder Warriors raised their weapons, the Custodians forming a line at the front. As one, they advanced toward the citadel's gates, ready to tear down the last sanctuary of the Priest King. The air erupted with the roar of bolters as the Thunder Warriors unleashed a storm of fire on the citadel's walls. Explosive rounds struck stone and metal, sending shards flying as the fortress shook under the assault. The Nordic defenders fought back fiercely, their weapons shifting from crude, scavenged relics to more sophisticated armaments. The closer the Emperor's forces drew to the stronghold, the more they encountered weapons that appeared newly manufactured, crafted for war, not simply salvaged from Terra's lost past. From the battlements, Nordic soldiers fired with precision, using energy weapons that glowed with a dangerous hum. They rained projectiles down upon the advancing force, determined to hold their ground with a discipline rarely seen among other warlord factions. Each defender fought with a grim resolve, their loyalty to the Priest King written in the fierce intensity of their attacks. At the head of the charge, the Custodians moved like golden phantoms, deflecting fire with their guardian spears and cutting down any who dared to challenge them. Behind them, the Thunder Warriors advanced with brutal strength, smashing through barricades and tearing apart obstacles in their path. Each step forward was a testament to the Emperor's relentless will. As he strode forward, the Emperor's presence radiated calm amid the chaos. His soldiers drew strength from his unyielding gaze, pressing harder in their assault. This was one more step in a grand campaign, another fortress to break, as they carved a path toward the heart of the Priest King's domain. With relentless pressure, the Emperor's forces pushed onward, and the ancient walls of the citadel began to tremble and crack under the unrelenting assault. As the walls of the citadel began to crumble under the relentless assault, a deep horn blast echoed from within the fortress, its low, resonant tone vibrating through stone and ice. The sound seemed to invigorate the Nordic defenders, who rallied with renewed ferocity. Emerging from side gates and hidden alcoves, more of the Priest King's elite warriors joined the battle, each one clad in newly forged armor that gleamed with cold efficiency. These were no mere fanatics. They were disciplined soldiers, drilled and prepared for this very moment. The Emperor's forces slowed, momentarily taken aback by the sheer intensity of the renewed defense. The Nordic warriors fought with a coordination that was rare among Terra's fractured warlords, holding formation and countering each Thunder Warrior's advance with skill and precision. They wielded weapons that hummed with unfamiliar energy, blades that crackled with power fields, and firearms that released streams of bright plasma. The air filled with the sounds of brutal, close combat, the clash of advanced weaponry against the raw might of the Emperor's army. The Custodians responded with a calm and lethal precision, weaving through the chaos with practiced movements, each guardian spear flashing as it struck down another defender. The Emperor watched as his forces pressed onward, the discipline of his Custodians and the unstoppable might of the Thunder Warriors slowly overwhelming the defenders. The citadel's gates had been breached, but the path forward remained steeped in blood. The Emperor's gaze swept over the scene, assessing, calculating. This was a crucial step, one of many, in dismantling the power structure that had held the Nordic people in thrall for generations. With a steady, unbreakable focus, he raised his hand, signaling for the final push toward the inner sanctum. Deep within the tunnels beneath the mountain, Thane and his squad pressed forward, their path lit only by the dim glow of their helmets and the flickering display of their ancient mapping device. The narrow, claustrophobic passageways twisted and turned, branching off into dark corridors and abandoned chambers. The weight of centuries hung heavy in the air, and the silence was broken only by the sound of the Thunder Warriors' heavy footsteps echoing through the stone. As they advanced, the sound of movement stirred ahead, a low murmur, the scrape of metal on stone. Thane raised his fist, signaling his squad to halt. They braced themselves, forming a line within the confined space, weapons at the ready. Moments later, the passageway ahead erupted with hostile figures as Nordic defenders appeared from the shadows. These warriors were hardened and disciplined, wielding weapons designed for close combat, their armor reflecting the cold, calculated efficiency of the Priest King's elite. The tunnel narrowed, funneling the Nordic warriors into a choke point that prevented them from swarming the Thunder Warriors. Yet, this also meant that only a few Thunder Warriors could engage at once, forcing Thane's squad to rely on skill and precision rather than brute force. The Nordic defenders pressed forward with relentless determination, their bodies filling the passageway, their sheer numbers forming a seemingly impenetrable wall. But Thane's warriors held their ground. The Thunder Warriors, though fewer in number, fought with a discipline and precision that only gene-forged strength and rigorous training could produce. Each movement was calculated, each strike deliberate. Thane stood at the forefront, leading his squad with unyielding focus as they confronted each wave of Nordic defenders. The narrow tunnel worked in their favor, limiting how many opponents could engage them at once. The Thunder Warriors became an unbreakable wall, holding firm and steadily pushing forward. The Nordic defenders fought with desperation, but Thane's squad advanced with relentless control, their experience and training prevailing in the tight quarters. In the end, Thane's squad emerged victorious, their armor battered and their breathing heavy, but their resolve unbroken. Thane surveyed the scene for a moment before giving the signal to continue deeper into the tunnels. The path was clear, and their mission pressed onward. As Thane's squad pushed deeper into the tunnels, the atmosphere grew colder, the air thick with the weight of stone pressing down from above. Shadows clung to the walls, and the ancient twisting passageways seemed to close in around them. Every footstep echoed ominously, and even the hardened Thunder Warriors felt the silent intensity of the place, as if the mountain itself was watching them. Up above, the main assault continued to press toward the heart of the Priest King's fortress. The Emperor's forces were methodically dismantling the stronghold's defenses, driving the Nordic defenders back inch by inch. The walls of the citadel shook under the relentless bombardment as the Thunder Warriors and Custodians advanced, step by determined step. Meanwhile, the Emperor moved with calm purpose, observing every detail of the battle, his mind ever focused on the greater vision. Each stronghold taken, each wall breached, brought him closer to his ultimate goal. He knew that the fall of this stronghold would weaken the Priest King's power, unraveling the structure that had held these people in thrall for generations. The Emperor's gaze turned northward, his thoughts reaching beyond the immediate clash to the future he was forging. The campaign was far from over, but he could feel the momentum building. Soon, the old powers of Terra would be nothing more than a memory, and a new age of unity would dawn under his rule. As the Emperor's forces drove deeper into the fortress, the resistance intensified. The Nordic defenders fought with a tenacity that bordered on desperation, launching counterattacks from fortified positions and hidden corridors. The stone halls echoed with the clash of weapons, the roar of bolters, and the shouts of soldiers locked in close combat. Amid the chaos, the Custodians advanced with their typical grace and precision, sweeping aside defenders who dared to stand in their path. Each Custodian moved as if they were part of a single coordinated mind, their golden armor glinting even in the dim torchlight of the fortress interior. Behind them, the Thunder Warriors pushed forward like a tide, smashing through barricades and breaking defensive lines with sheer, overwhelming force. Yet, the Emperor himself remained a point of calm focus in the heart of the battle. He moved purposefully through the conflict, his presence alone inspiring those around him to fight with even greater determination. He could sense the fear beginning to spread among the Nordic defenders, their confidence waning as they realized the relentless force arrayed against them. The Emperor paused as they approached a large set of doors, intricately carved with symbols and runes from an age long past. This, he knew, was one of the final barriers between his forces and the inner sanctum of the Priest King. The defenders had made their stand here, pouring every last reserve into holding this line. But the Emperor was resolute. This door, like the others before it, would fall. He raised his hand, signaling his warriors to prepare for the breach. With a deafening explosion, the ancient doors burst inward, blasted apart by the Thunder Warriors' breaching charges. Shards of stone and metal flew in all directions, filling the air with dust and smoke. Without hesitation, the Emperor's forces advanced, stepping over the shattered remnants of the door and into the inner sanctum of the Priest King's fortress. The chamber beyond was vast and dimly lit, its vaulted ceilings adorned with strange, shifting symbols carved in a language from a forgotten age. Statues of old pagan gods lined the walls, their hollow eyes watching as if bearing witness to the final confrontation. At the far end of the room, surrounded by his most elite warriors, stood the Priest King of Maulland Sen. The Priest King was an imposing figure, draped in robes adorned with symbols of his ancient rule. Strange talismans and charms hung from his neck and arms, relics that pulsed with an unnatural energy. Though he did not understand the true nature of the forces he wielded, the Priest King had tapped into dark, dangerous powers. The air around him shimmered with a malevolent energy, warping the very light in the chamber. His eyes glowed with a fierce, unnatural intensity, and he raised his hand, chanting in a forgotten tongue that seemed to make the very stone tremble. With a single command, the Priest King unleashed his warriors. His elite guards surged forward, each one clad in finely crafted armor and wielding weapons of rare, dark metal. These were not mere defenders. They were his most loyal, his most devoted, men willing to give their lives to defend their lord. Their eyes glinted with a fanaticism born of years of service and indoctrination. The Emperor's custodians stepped forward, forming a solid wall in front of him as the clash erupted in the chamber. The Priest King's guard fought with a discipline and skill that was unmatched by the other Nordic defenders, wielding their weapons with deadly precision. But the custodians, clad in their golden armor, met each attack with equal strength, their guardian spears flashing as they countered and struck down their foes. Behind the custodians, the Thunder Warriors added their own relentless force to the fray. Their brutal power crashed against the Priest King's guard, driving them back with sheer, overwhelming strength. The inner sanctum became a maelstrom of combat, filled with the roar of weapons, the clash of metal, and the shouts of warriors locked in battle. Amid the chaos, the Emperor advanced, his presence unshaken, his gaze fixed on the Priest King himself. He could see the dark energies swirling around his opponent, an unholy power that threatened the stability of Terra itself. In this moment, the Emperor understood that this was more than just a battle for territory. It was a battle for the soul of Terra, to rid it of the warlords who wielded forces they did not comprehend. The Emperor's forces pressed forward, their discipline and unbreakable will slowly overwhelming the defenders. The final confrontation was at hand. The Emperor's forces surged forward, carving a path through the last of the Priest King's elite guard. The chamber was choked with the sounds of clashing metal and desperate cries as the Thunder Warriors and Custodians pressed deeper into the inner sanctum, each step bringing them closer to the towering figure at the center. The Priest King watched his warriors fall, yet he remained unmoved, his expression one of absolute defiance. Dark energies pulsed around him, crackling in the air like a gathering storm. Though he did not understand the true nature of the warp, he had stumbled upon its power, channeling it through ancient rituals and forbidden relics. The very ground beneath him seemed to pulse in response to his presence, vibrating with a malevolent energy that made the air feel thick and oppressive. Seeing his forces approaching, the Priest King raised his arms and began to chant in a low, guttural tone, calling upon the same powers that had protected his realm for decades. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming shapes that flickered at the edges of perception, and an eerie light illuminated his eyes, filling them with an unnatural glow. The Emperor halted, his gaze fixed on the Priest King, fully aware of the danger that dark power posed, not only to his forces but to Terra itself. He could sense the taint of the warp, a force that, if left unchecked, would sow corruption and chaos across the world. For the Emperor, this was more than the conquest of a kingdom. It was a step toward purging Terra of the unnatural, of the powers that threatened to drag humanity into darkness. With a calm, commanding gesture, the Emperor signaled his custodians to fall back. This was a task he intended to face personally. As the Custodians and Thunder Warriors formed a perimeter, the Emperor stepped forward, his golden armor gleaming, his presence radiating authority and purpose. The Priest King's chanting faltered, his eyes narrowing as he beheld the figure approaching him. An embodiment of power and control, a force of nature beyond anything the Priest King had ever known. The room grew silent, the chaotic clash of battle fading into an almost reverent hush as the Emperor and the Priest King faced each other. It was a duel of ideologies as much as strength, a confrontation between the twisted remnants of Terra's past and the unyielding vision of its future. The Emperor advanced, his steps steady and deliberate, his eyes locked on the Priest King. Silence settled over the chamber as the two leaders faced each other, the weight of their opposing wills filling the room. Dark energies coiled around the Priest King, crackling in the air like a gathering storm. Though he had little understanding of the warp's true nature, he had tapped into forbidden powers through rituals and relics, drawing on forces that twisted his body and mind. Beside the Emperor, Valdor, Captain General of the Custodians, moved into position, his golden armor gleaming in the torchlight. Valdor's eyes were sharp, taking in the layout of the chamber and the arrangement of the Priest King's remaining guards. He knew that they were close to ending this battle, but capturing the Priest King would require precision and coordination. The Emperor's mind, Valdor knew, was already several steps ahead, anticipating every move their opponent might make. The Priest King, surrounded by his elite warriors, met the Emperor's gaze with a defiant snarl. His voice echoed through the chamber, a mixture of pride and desperation. "You think yourself master of Terra, Emperor, but you are nothing but a usurper. This world is not yours to take." The Emperor's expression remained calm, his gaze unyielding. He gestured to Valdor with a slight nod, and the Captain General understood immediately. They would advance together, pressuring the Priest King from both sides, driving him into a corner. This was a tactic they had employed countless times during the Unification Wars, a method that left no path of escape for those who tried to resist. With a single command from the Priest King, his elite guard surged forward, forming a defensive line to shield their ruler from the Emperor's advance. Valdor stepped in to meet them, his guardian spear flashing as he dispatched the defenders with swift, lethal efficiency. The Custodians and Thunder Warriors pressed forward, closing in on the last of the Nordic warriors who still stood between the Emperor and his prey. The Priest King took a step back, his confidence beginning to falter as he watched his guard cut down with ruthless precision. In a final, desperate attempt, he raised his hands, a surge of dark energy that filled the room with an unnatural chill. Shadows writhed around him, casting eerie shapes across the walls as he chanted in a language older than Terra's recorded history. But the Emperor and Valdor advanced steadily, undeterred. The Emperor raised his hand, meeting the warp-tainted energy with his own indomitable will, his presence cutting through the darkness like a blade. The Priest King's face twisted with panic as he realized he was outmatched, his dark powers unable to halt the inevitable. With a final, frantic glance around the chamber, the Priest King turned and fled, activating a hidden mechanism on the floor beneath him. A section of stone slid open, revealing a narrow passage into the depths of the mountain. Before the Emperor or Valdor could reach him, the trapdoor sealed itself, locking the Priest King out of sight. Valdor turned to the Emperor, his expression one of controlled urgency. "Shall we pursue, my lord?" The Emperor's gaze was fixed on the closed passage, a faint glint of determination in his eyes. "We will not allow him to escape," he replied, his voice calm yet resolute. He signaled his custodians to begin preparing charges to breach the trapdoor. As the charges were set, the sounds of battle still raged around them. The defenders of Maulland Sen continued to resist in the surrounding halls, desperately trying to hold off the Emperor's forces. But this fortress was already a lost cause. The Emperor knew that once the trapdoor was breached, he would follow the Priest King himself into the darkness below, where Thane's squad lay in wait to close off any remaining routes of escape. The Emperor and Valdor stood together, each poised with a readiness honed through countless battles. Soon the passage would be open, and the final confrontation with the Priest King would begin. The charges detonated with a controlled blast, sending a plume of dust and fragments into the air as the trapdoor blew open, revealing the dark passage below. Without a word, the Emperor strode forward, descending into the depths with Valdor and a squad of Custodians close behind. The tunnel was narrow and dim, winding ever downward, carved from the ancient rock of the mountain itself. It was cold and silent, the air thick with the weight of centuries. As they descended, the distant sounds of battle above began to fade, leaving only the soft, rhythmic echoes of their footsteps. The Emperor's face remained impassive, but his mind was focused, keenly aware that the Priest King's desperation would only make him more dangerous. This was no longer about reclaiming territory. It was about purging a threat that, if left unchecked, could fester and spread. The Custodians moved with silent efficiency, their senses heightened as they scanned the darkness ahead. They knew that the Priest King, armed with his twisted powers and driven by fear, could be lying in ambush anywhere within these tunnels. Valdor stayed close to the Emperor, his eyes sharp, his guardian spear ready. The passage twisted again, opening into a larger cavern lined with stalactites and remnants of ancient carvings. Here, the Emperor paused, sensing that they were drawing closer. The faint echo of footsteps came from further within, retreating deeper into the mountain's heart. The Emperor's expression hardened as he continued his pursuit, his steps unyielding. He knew that ahead lay Thane and his squad, positioned to cut off the Priest King's escape and ensure there would be no way out. Deeper within the labyrinth of tunnels, Thane and his squad waited, weapons at the ready. They had advanced through the subterranean passages, following the flickering map on their tracking device until they reached a point where several tunnels converged, a natural choke point. Here, they could intercept anyone trying to escape the Emperor's forces above. The Thunder Warriors stood in tense silence, each of them fully aware of the importance of their position. The darkness around them was thick, almost oppressive, and the only sound was the distant rumble of the ongoing battle in the fortress above. Thane's grip on his weapon was steady, his gaze fixed on the shadows stretching out before them. He knew that the Emperor would drive the Priest King down into the depths, leaving no path of escape. A faint noise echoed from the tunnel ahead, the scuff of hurried footsteps. Thane motioned for his squad to ready themselves. Moments later, the twisted figure of the Priest King emerged from the darkness, his robes torn, his face marked by both fear and fury. He stumbled as he came into view, but his eyes still held that unnatural gleam, a trace of the dark energies he had summoned in his desperate last stand. The Priest King stopped abruptly, his gaze sweeping over Thane and his warriors. For a brief moment, he seemed ready to turn and flee again, but there was nowhere left to run. His hands clenched as he looked upon the Thunder Warriors, a final wall of steel and muscle standing between him and freedom. Without hesitation, Thane stepped forward, his voice echoing through the cavern. "There's no escape for you here," he said, his tone steady and unyielding. "Your reign ends now." The Priest King snarled, drawing on the last vestiges of his strength and power. With a furious cry, he surged forward, his form flickering as he called upon the forbidden energies that had sustained him. But the Thunder Warriors stood firm, their eyes cold and their weapons raised. The Emperor would arrive soon. The Priest King's eyes burned with a fierce, desperate intensity as he raised his hands, dark energies crackling around him. He gathered the warp-tainted power he had harnessed, the shadows around him twisting into forms that seemed alive. With a guttural cry, he unleashed a wave of energy that surged through the cavern, striking the Thunder Warriors with a force like a hammer. One of Thane's warriors was hit directly, the dark energy piercing his armor and searing his flesh beneath. The Thunder Warrior staggered back, his body convulsing as tendrils of warp energy pulsed through him, warping the metal around the impact and leaving smoking burns. Even with his gene-forged resilience, the warrior fell to one knee, gasping in pain, his armor scorched and twisted by the unnatural assault. Thane's face hardened as he took in the sight. This was no ordinary warlord. This was a creature who wielded a power that defied the natural order, a power that had no place on Terra. Without hesitation, Thane raised his fist and barked an order to his squad. "Heavy fire! Force him back!" The Thunder Warriors moved in unison, their bolters roaring to life as they unleashed a hail of rounds on the Priest King. The cavern filled with the thunderous echo of gunfire, each shot aimed with deadly precision. The rounds hurtled toward the Priest King, who instinctively threw up his hands, summoning a barrier of dark energy to shield himself. The impact of each bolt round against the barrier sent ripples of distortion through the air as the Priest King strained to hold back the relentless onslaught. Thane knew that forcing him to defend was buying them precious seconds. The more the Priest King relied on his dark powers, the weaker he would become. It was only a matter of time before the Emperor arrived, and Thane intended to hold the line until then. As the barrage continued, he signaled his men to press forward, closing the distance inch by inch, their weapons blazing, pushing the Priest King further into the corner. The Priest King's barrier flickered under the unending assault, his expression twisted with effort and rage. But Thane held his ground, knowing that the Emperor's judgment was closing in, and that this display of dark power would soon come to an end. The Priest King's defenses faltered, his dark energy barrier flickering and thinning under the relentless hail of bolter fire. Each impact chipped away at the shield, the strain of maintaining it etched across his face. His breath came in ragged gasps as he staggered back, the twisted remnants of his power waning. Seeing the weakness, Thane pushed his squad forward. "Advance!" he barked, his voice like iron. The Thunder Warriors moved as one, stepping over rocky debris and closing the distance, bolters still trained on the Priest King. They knew that his powers, unnatural as they were, could be exhausted, forced into submission through sheer pressure. But the Priest King wasn't finished yet. With a defiant snarl, he dropped his failing barrier and thrust his hands forward, unleashing a concentrated blast of dark energy that struck two of the Thunder Warriors directly. The force was immense, sending both warriors stumbling back. Their armor cracked and scorched. One of them fell, his body twitching as warp-tainted energy coursed through him. The other braced himself, teeth gritted against the pain, struggling to hold his ground despite the damage. Thane clenched his jaw, watching as his warriors were battered by the Priest King's final desperate strikes. He knew they couldn't withstand another blast like that. With quick precision, he gave a hand signal, ordering his squad to take cover behind the jagged rocks scattered throughout the cavern. As the Thunder Warriors spread out, Thane called out to his men, "Pin him down, force him to burn through his last reserves." The Thunder Warriors adjusted their positions, laying down focused, controlled bursts of fire from all angles. Each shot kept the Priest King on the defensive, forcing him to divert what remained of his strength into shielding himself rather than attacking. Bit by bit, his movements grew slower, his expression more frantic as he realized his powers were draining away. Thane's strategy was working. They were wearing him down, stripping him of his final defenses. All that was left was to hold out until the Emperor arrived, to deliver the judgment that would end this reign of twisted power once and for all. The Priest King staggered, his breaths labored, his once commanding presence reduced to a figure of desperation and exhaustion. The dark energies that had once shielded him now flickered weakly, barely holding up against the unrelenting fire from Thane's squad. His hands shook, the remnants of his power slipping through his grasp like sand. Thane watched with cold, calculated focus. He could see the fear creeping into the Priest King's eyes, the dawning realization that he was truly cornered. The warped ruler glanced around the cavern, searching for any possible escape route, but there was none. His power was failing him, and he was surrounded by relentless warriors who would not stop until he was brought down. Just then, a heavy silence fell over the cavern. The echo of bolter fire ceased as the Thunder Warriors lowered their weapons, sensing the arrival of a greater presence. From the shadows of the tunnel, the Emperor emerged, his golden armor gleaming even in the dim light, his gaze fixed upon the Priest King. Behind him, Valdor and several Custodians flanked his approach, their expressions as steady and implacable as ever. The Priest King's eyes widened as he looked upon the Emperor, a mixture of fear and defiance twisting his face. Despite his exhaustion, he raised his hands one final time, summoning the last dregs of his strength. Dark energy coiled around him, crackling with a sickly green glow, as he prepared to unleash one last desperate attack. But the Emperor simply raised a hand, and with a gesture, an invisible force pressed down upon the Priest King, pinning him in place. The dark energy dissipated, slipping from the Priest King's grasp as he fell to his knees, powerless under the Emperor's will. His hands trembled, his head bowed, and for the first time he looked utterly defeated. The Emperor took a step forward, his expression one of calm authority. His gaze was unyielding as he looked down upon the fallen ruler. "Your reign of corruption ends here," he said, his voice steady, carrying a weight of finality that echoed through the chamber. The Priest King looked up, his eyes filled with hatred and fear, but he was helpless, stripped of the dark power that had once sustained him. Thane and his squad watched in silent respect, understanding that this moment, the Emperor's judgment, was the true end to this twisted ruler's rule. The Emperor regarded the defeated Priest King in silence, his gaze sharp and unyielding. The chamber was utterly still, the weight of the moment pressing down on all who watched. Thane, Valdor, and the assembled Thunder Warriors and Custodians stood back, bearing witness to what would be the final judgment. This was not merely the end of a ruler. It was the end of a relic from Terra's dark, fractured past. The Priest King, on his knees and breathing heavily, managed to raise his head one last time to meet the Emperor's gaze. His face was twisted with exhaustion and fury, yet there was still a glimmer of defiance in his eyes. The dark powers he had wielded, the forbidden rituals he had clung to, had failed him utterly in the face of the Emperor's vision. The Emperor took a step forward, each movement calm and deliberate. Without a word, he drew his blade, a gleaming weapon crafted to reflect the strength and purity of his purpose. The Priest King flinched, but he did not look away. If there was fear in his eyes, it was hidden beneath a layer of bitter pride. Standing over the broken ruler, the Emperor spoke, his voice low but clear. "For your corruption and the stain you have left on humanity, there is only one end." The Priest King snarled, his voice filled with venom. "You may kill me, but others will rise. The power I wield is eternal." The Emperor's expression remained unchanged. He raised his blade and with a single swift stroke brought it down, severing the last vestige of the Priest King's reign. The execution was as swift as it was final, a clean end to a twisted legacy. The Emperor held the severed head aloft, turning to face his warriors. Every Custodian, Thunder Warrior, and soldier in the chamber watched with a fierce, silent respect. This act was more than just the end of a warlord. It was a symbol, a reminder that no ruler who clung to dark powers or corrupted humanity's essence would stand against the Emperor's vision for Terra. Thane and his squad looked on, understanding the message as clearly as anyone present. The fall of the Priest King was a warning to every other warlord and techno-barbarian on Terra. Defiance was futile. The Emperor lowered the head, his gaze settling on Thane and Valdor. "We move forward," he said, his voice carrying the weight of destiny. "Terra will be unified, no matter the cost." And with that, the Emperor turned, leading his forces back toward the light. The fall of Maulland Sen had ended, but the Unification Wars would continue, and with each step, Terra would draw closer to a new unified future. Emerging from the depths of the mountain, the Emperor and his forces stepped into the cold, pale light of Terra's surface. The fortress of Maulland Sen lay in ruins behind them. Its last ruler struck down, his twisted powers extinguished. The message was clear. Terra's fractured kingdoms would fall, one by one, until only unity remained. The Emperor paused, his gaze sweeping across the snowy landscape. Beside him stood Valdor, Thane, and the Custodians, their armor marked with the scars of battle, but their resolve unshaken. This was only the beginning. The path to a united Terra, and ultimately to the stars, would be long and hard-fought. Yet with each victory, the Emperor's vision grew closer to reality. As he looked to the horizon, one could almost sense the future he envisioned, an imperium of man, forged on Terra and destined to span the stars. If you enjoyed this journey through the lore of Warhammer 40k, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more explorations of the Emperor's conquests and the unification of Terra. Many battles remain, and the path to unity is far from over.